Quiet Strength, Chapter 14. I heard rumors for the first time at the end of the 2000 season that the Glazers might be looking for a new head coach. Other people probably heard them earlier. Lauren says I'm usually the last one to pick up on things. I had 2 years left on my contract, but my assistant coaches were entering their last year. My agent, Ray Anderson, who knew more about the rumors than I did, felt we needed to approach the Glazers about an extension. I was against the idea. I believed I should coach out to the end of my contract if I expected to be paid fairly at the end of the day. Ray, however, was worried about security, so we decided that he should talk with the Glazers. They refused to extend my contract, but did agree to give 1-year extensions to all of my assistants. That was fine with me. I didn't want to get into another situation like we faced at the 2000 Pro Bowl, when my coaches were out of contract and concerned about their immediate futures. So it has to be hard to be a head coach in the NFL because there's always someone unhappy with you for the most part. And here at the end of 2000, Tony starts hearing some rumors that the Glazers might fire him, that they're shopping around for a new head coach. And that would be, well, what do you do? Do you approach them? Do you just see if the rumors are true? And so they're not going to extend his contract yet, right? But they do make it to where all of his assistant coaches at least get a 1-year extension. Lovie Smith and Herm Edwards left the Buccaneers in January of 2001. Lovie was hired to be the defensive coordinator for the St. Louis Rams, while Herm became the new head coach of the New York Jets. True to his word, Herm hadn't left for anything less than a head coaching position, though he had been offered a number of opportunities to become a coordinator over the years. I was sorry to see them both go. We hadn't made a change on the defensive side of the ball since we'd arrived in Tampa in 1996, and now we had to make two. As I began the interview process, Herm called from the Jets facility on Long Island. "You should see my office up here, Tony. It's got a wall of glass that overlooks the practice field. But the best part is they're concerned that it's not big enough. They want to know if I need it expanded." I said no thanks and didn't bother to tell them that it's 20 times larger than my closet in Tampa, and the door can be shut while I'm still sitting. Again, we flash back to how old and run down One Buck, where all the coaches' offices are for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And Herm Edwards had that office that was actually like a closet. And so you couldn't close the door all the way because of the desk and the chair in there. And now he's taking a head coaching position with the Jets and has this amazing new office space and just living a different life now. Joel Glazer, who again is one of the owners, he's part of the family who owns the Buccaneers, approached me in the visiting locker room in the Georgia Dome on the final day of August. We were about to play the Falcons in our last preseason game, and Joel and I found ourselves alone. I figured he wanted to allay my concerns about my future and the rumors that were circulating. I was right. "Tony, I know you're hearing rumors that if we don't win at all this year, we're going to make a change. I want you to know you don't have to win the Super Bowl this year. We don't want to extend your contract now with 2 years left, but you're our coach, and we have confidence in you." Okay, so that is part of the owner's team, right? One of their members, Joel Glazer, telling Tony in August, right, that he doesn't have anything to worry about. They're not going to extend his contract right now, right? But they have confidence in him. That was all I needed, to look him in the eye and hear him give me his word. Lauren wasn't convinced, however. Something was different, and she could feel it. She always claims that I go through life with rose-colored glasses on, which is while she is more perceptive. She's right on both accounts. Part of what she had always enjoyed about the Bucs organization was that the Glazers were so personally involved, yet so deferential to her opinions. They regularly contacted her to get her thoughts on various issues, and it had allowed her to set the course for the Buccaneers' wives organization. But in 2001, the calls had stopped, and new leaders took over the wives organization. I believed there were other explanations for these things, but Lauren wasn't so sure. She believed the landscape was changing. So that, to me, if I was Lauren or Tony, that would be a clear indicator that the Glazers are possibly shopping around for a new head coach, that a lot of people aren't happy with Tony and the fact he hasn't brought the Buccaneers to a Super Bowl. His wife is starting to get cut out of things. The Glazers, again, the owners, they used to come to her, asking her opinions on things, and they've gone radio silent with her. And she used to also chair up a lot of things that concern the Buccaneers' wives organization, and she's been cut out of that as well. And so I feel like there are signs here pointing towards not all is well with Tony being with the Buccaneers, but he's still trying to take the positive road. Tom Lampier, my longtime friend and chaplain from Minneapolis, called me to ask about the rumors he had been hearing about my job security. I was hearing them as well, but had chosen not to dwell on them. Worrying about my job is not my responsibility. It's God's, I told Tom. My job is to coach. I believe that. Not only did I have Joel's assurance that there was nothing to those rumors, I also felt that God was using this to test me. Just like when I had mono in 1978, the question was whether I would stay focused on the Lord or start worrying about things I couldn't control. I knew I needed to stay focused, continue to be the leader of our team, and let the Lord handle the future. Had I grown enough in my Christian faith to do this? So he flashes back to 1978 when he did have mono and realized that God wasn't his top priority, that football was. And so now with all these rumors circulating around, he's thinking about that scenario once again, right? That he's focused on what he can be focused on, right? And does he have enough faith to know that God is in control of this situation, no matter what the outcome might be? In 2001, Simeon Rice was a free agent. Rod and I took him to dinner when he was visiting Tampa. Simeon had been drafted 3rd overall by the Cardinals in 1996 and had tied the NFL record for sacks by a rookie. He'd been a 2-time All-American at the University of Illinois, and he continued with great sack totals in his first 5 years in the NFL. At an opportune point during the dinner, Rod leaned across the table and, with burning intensity in his eyes, spoke to Simeon. Simeon, you're a talented guy, but you're not a great player. You sack the quarterback and do some good things, but you don't play with the effort and intensity that it takes to be a winner. That's why you should come to Tampa. You need me to make you a great player. Simeon looked at Rod like he was crazy, clearly thinking, how can you think I'm not a great player? But Rod had him. Simeon signed up with the Buccaneers, and Rod rode him hard through the camp and into the season, trying to light a fire within him and get him to play up to his tremendous ability on every play. Rod was known to take Simeon out of games and talk about his intensity, then send him back in after a few plays. Out, then in, out again, then back in, over and over. We played a home game against Green Bay in October. It was a typical Tampa day, muggy and hot, around 80 degrees. It was a tough physical game, and we were fortunate to grind out a win, 14-10, after Brett Favre threw incomplete passes into the end zone on the last 2 plays of the game. Simeon fell to the turf on his back, exhausted. He, with his teammates, had played with every down passion that Rod demanded, so much so that he required IV fluids after the game. Rod ran out into the field, exhilarated by the win and the fact that he'd gotten through to Sim after all those weeks. He said over Sim, "Now you're starting to understand. This effort is what we've been talking about." Sim looked up and in typical Simeon Rice candor said, "If this is what it takes to win every game, I'm not sure I want it. It's not worth it." Rod's elation was immediately deflated. Eventually, though, Simeon became a player we knew we could count on. For the 4th year in a row, we started the season 3-4. We lost to Green Bay on the road, but defeated them at home. We swept Detroit, but got swept by Chicago. We beat the Rams in St. Louis. It had been a roller coaster year by the time we battled back to clinch a wild card playoff spot during the next to last week of the season. Along the way, we split with Minnesota, losing the game in Minneapolis, but winning the game in Tampa. In that game, we were faced with a situation in which league rules actually seemed to reward unsportsmanlike behavior. Back then, if teams were tied for playoff berth, one of the tiebreakers was a point differential. Which team had beaten its opponents by more points over the course of the season? The point differential wasn't the first tiebreaker, but it occasionally did come into play. When we played the Vikings in Tampa, we found ourselves inside Minnesota's 5-yard line with a 27-point lead in less than 2 minutes to play. We knelt on the ball 4 times, just running out the clock rather than trying to score. When we were winning with a big lead, I never liked to rub it in, especially when facing a good friend like Denny Green. Okay, that's an interesting point to note, is there are some coaches that love to run up that score as much as they can and really rub it in the other team's face, right, about how much better they are than them. And then some coaches are more merciful, right? And they're like, okay, we're going to put in, our second string or third string, whatever, or like Tony did, right, that they knelt on the ball 4 times, right, because you've won at that point. So what are you doing but just like really crushing the other team's spirits by continuing to run up the score? But not all coaches see it the same way Tony does. Some like to run up the score a lot. Tony does not like to do that to other people. After the game, someone asked me whether I realized that my decision could cost our team a playoff spot if we ended up tied in the standings. If the Buccaneers miss the playoffs because we refuse to embarrass another team, I said, then it's a lousy rule. Fortunately, that rule was later changed, so coaches no longer have to make that decision. I hoped, of course, that my decision wouldn't end up hurting the team, just as I had hoped in 1997 with Michael Heston. But I believe that our principles were more important than worrying about the slight chance of missing the playoffs. I knew that if I was going to emphasize character, then I had to be willing to back it up with actions, even if those actions were difficult. Looking back, I still believe it was the right thing to do. And that's an interesting point to make there. Tony says, I knew that if I was going to emphasize character, then I had to be willing to back it up with actions. And that's so true, right? You got to walk the walk if you talk the talk. You can't just talk the talk, right? You got to live out what you say. And so for him, he said, if he's emphasizing character to the other coaches, to his team, he needs to display that himself. Although I've summarized our regular season in fairly short order, the season was anything but short for those of us who lived it. The NFL season lasts from July to January. It's a long grind in the best of years, but with the rumors of a coaching change circulating, the 2001 season seemed even longer for many of our coaches and staff and their families. Lauren was especially sensitive to the changes in the air. Although she had previously been a sounding board for the Glazers, she now heard only silence. In the past, she often came by to spend time with me and our boys, who were in my office every afternoon after school. That year, she decided to stay away. Shortly before the end of the regular season, I had just finished a workout and was drying off in a cramped coach's locker room after my shower. A member of our front office staff was also in the locker room, getting ready for a run. "Coach, I just wanted to say that I've appreciated seeing your witness in light of the circus that is occurring all around," he said. I didn't really have a chance to reflect on my answer before I gave it, but now I'm not sure I could have improved on it much even now. "I think there are times when I believe God welcomes the circus into our lives, to give us an opportunity to show that there's another way to live and respond to things." Those words are no less true today than they were then. Again, I think that's a great response there by Tony. Right? I think there are times when I believe God welcomes the circus, the craziness, right, the noise, into our lives to give us an opportunity to show that there's another way to live and respond to things. Questions of faith, for all of us, I suspect, were pushed to the forefront of our lives and national consciousness by the events of September 11th, 2001, just 2 days after we had beaten Dallas in our opening game. The day before September 11th, Jade had joined our family through adoption. Remember, they adopted a boy and a girl. Jordan was the little boy, and then Jade was the little girl. When we got her, I'd been so excited to think about all we could offer her as a family: love, stability, financial security. But on that Tuesday, the players' day off, and a day we coaches are normally sequestered in a dark film room preparing for our next opponent, everything changed. We usually miss news events, but that day our thoughts of the Eagles stopped us as we found ourselves glued to the television screens and wondering what was going to happen. Some of the staff left early. Others of us just stayed together to watch. Suddenly, I realized how foolish I had been to think I could provide any kind of security for our new baby. As those events unfolded, it became clear to me that only God could do that. As the day continued, it became obvious that we weren't going to play that week. In an unprecedented decision, Commissioner Talby postponed all week 2 games, possibly to be rescheduled for a later date. We were scheduled for a bye the following week, so we would not play again until the last week in September. By the time our bye week came along, the nation's resolve had become firm, unified, and pointed toward getting back into a normal routine. We did not want this act of terror to have changed our daily lives. I had never before attempted to convince someone that football was terribly important in the overall scheme of life. But as we prepared for the game against Minnesota that week, I told the team that the best thing we could do for our country and to honor those who had died was to continue to do our jobs with the excellence in spite of our national adversity. Our country needed a return to some sense of normalcy. We needed to get back to work for ourselves and our fans. This was like the 5 o'clock bus ride, an unforeseen obstacle we would have to overcome. I don't remember much about that first game after September 11th, but I know it wasn't the game itself I was looking forward to as much as just being out there again and getting back to work. It had been a while since I had given much thought to the significance of singing the national anthem before a game, since it happened so routinely every week. I was usually more interested in who was performing it. But this game, I was focused on the anthem itself, the words, the music, the meaning, as much as the game. I was focused on our team standing out there, ready to go back to work in honor of our country. was a statement to the world and anyone who would seek to harm us. You cannot stop us from pressing on. That was one of the few games in my life that I remember little about what happened or even whether we won or lost. What I do remember is that the Minnesota fans did a great job, as did fans across the country, of supporting us, our nation, and those who had died. We were all unified in our patriotism. I've always felt that God remains in control despite the situations we find ourselves in, and I believed he would use that tragic events of September 11th for his glory as well. I never lost faith that God loves us. He sent his son, Jesus, to make it possible for us to have a full and joyful life here, and to make it possible for us to spend eternity with him in heaven. September 11th made me think about that a lot. Compared to eternity, worrying about things like coaching jobs, playoffs, and even the Super Bowl didn't seem so important. So 2001 comes along, and there's rumors that Tony is going to get fired, and he's no longer going to be the head coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And he's trying to just kind of push those rumors aside and focus on his job. And then September 11th happens, right? The planes crash into the World Trade Center towers. They crash into the Pentagon. They crash into Pennsylvania Field. And perspectives change for everyone. And it's weird to think about if you didn't live through this time, just like how on edge America was, and you weren't sure what was really going to happen. But what you were sure about is that you were an American and that you united together, right, as a country. And so even though we experienced such tragedy, like life did go on, right? Jobs went on for people, sports went on. And it sounds weird that we would just go back to playing games so soon after such a large tragedy shocked our nation. But like Tony says, like these games did bring people together. People needed that, right? They needed that distraction and that to enjoy something in life and be reminded that life can be good and wonderful. And so Tony says that also through September 11th, it put things into perspective for him. He says there, right, in those last two sentences, September 11th made me think about that a lot. Compared to eternity, worrying about things like coaching jobs, playoffs, and even the Super Bowl didn't seem so important. So yes, these rumors are going around about him, but he's like, ultimately, that doesn't matter. It was week 18 of the regular season. Usually the NFL season has 17 weeks, 16 games plus a bye week, but the commissioner had decided to reschedule those week 2 games for the week immediately following the normal end of the regular season, pushing the playoffs back by a week. Our matchup with Philadelphia, which had been highly anticipated by the fans and media in the preseason thanks to our playoff skirmish the year before, was now virtually meaningless. Both teams had already qualified for the playoffs, and the outcome wouldn't affect our seeding. Actually, it was beyond meaningless. We were scheduled to play the Eagles in Philadelphia the very next weekend in the first round of playoffs. Both teams would be careful not to show anything in this game that we might use the next week when the game actually mattered. So how ridiculous is that? You play the same team back-to-back weeks. After our staff meeting, we decided to rest more of our starters and play a very vanilla offense and defense, a preseason game approach. The young guys would get playing time and the starters would be protected from injury. We turned our attention to practice for the week. Okay, and that makes sense. If you know you're going to play the same team the next week, save your starters, right? Because that second game, that's the one that actually matters. On Thursday afternoon, January 3rd, I saw Rich walking out to the field. It wasn't unusual for him to come out and watch, but this time something seemed different. He walked straight toward me. In a very soft voice, Rich delivered the message from my dad. My mom had died. My mom had been fighting diabetes for a long time, so I had known this was coming, but I had dreaded it. And yet it was a relief. The disease had taken a physical toll. Her body had shrunk, and she had been confined to a wheelchair in constant pain. As sad as her death was, I was overcome with a sense of joy because I knew she was in heaven. All hit me at once, the sadness of losing my mom, coupled with the joy of knowing she was now with God, pain-free. It wouldn't be the last time I'd experienced those emotions simultaneously. Okay, so again, he's preparing for this playoff run, this playoff game against Philadelphia, and he gets the news that his mom has died. And it's kind of like this, I don't know if bittersweet's the right word, but she's been in pain for a long time, and he now knows that she's in heaven and no longer suffering, so he's happy about that, but obviously he's also sad that his mom is gone. My dad was handling all the arrangements for the funeral, which was to take place the following Tuesday. I stayed in Tampa to coach our last regular season game, certain my mom would have wanted me to. It was the first time I didn't care if we won or lost. wasn't just because of my mom's death, although that certainly put things into perspective. Rather, it was because we were scheduled to play the Eagles again in the playoffs in 6 days. I later learned that Rich had a slightly different perspective on that game in Week 18. We'd fallen behind early, and when we did, he said to another staff member, "Doesn't Tony realize how much harder it is to fire a 10-6 coach than one who is 9-7? I can't say I did, because I still didn't think there was a chance I would be fired. So when our backup players couldn't hold a 10-point fourth quarter lead, I didn't give it a second thought. I was only concerned with preparing for my mom's funeral and the next week's playoff game. Throughout the course of my 6-year tenure with the Buccaneers, the Glazers always flew with the team to away games. They sat in first class in our chartered 757 with the assistant coaches. Because there weren't enough seats for all the coaching staff in first class, Rich and I always sat in the last row of coach. I liked to sit in the back so I could see all the players. That Friday morning, Rick Stroud of the St. Petersburg Times wrote an article, quoting unnamed sources, saying that I would be fired if we didn't win Saturday's playoff game against the Eagles. I really didn't worry about it, but I didn't want the players to get distracted. So I brought the paper with me on the flight so I could talk to the Glazers. I knew I could ask Joel, given our conversation in Atlanta and his assurance then that I was their coach. None of the Glazers was on the flight with us that day. As Lauren says, I'm very naive, but that was the first time I felt that something was going on. How could the owners not fly with us to a playoff game? Okay, again, just like glaring signs that something's wrong. First with, the rumors that they were shopping around for a new coach, and then how his wife was getting iced out of everything. And now the owners who always fly with the team to away games do not fly with the team. So all these are huge signs pointing towards something that's going to happen to Tony. On Friday afternoon, we had a walk-through practice at Veterans Stadium in Philadelphia. It was cold and gray that day. Warren Sapp and a couple of other players took their shirts off in spite of the cold, trying to do their part to keep the others loose and relaxed. It didn't help. For the third consecutive playoff game, we didn't score a touchdown. We lost 31-9. We couldn't make a single big play, and in the meantime, we threw 4 interceptions. Just like that, we were done for the season, and when we arrived back in Tampa, I wondered if those unnamed sources in the Times were correct. Sunday came and went, and I didn't hear anything that would make me think I was about to be fired. We held our exit physicals and met as a team. Then the players went their separate ways. Most of them wouldn't return until the off-season program began in March. Rich told me that the Glazers were meeting as a family, but he thought we were going to be okay. The Glazers wanted to discuss some changes, but they were looking at continuing things for at least another year. I still had regrets about how I handled the Mike Shula situation in 1999, so I was concerned about the kinds of changes they might ask for. On Monday, we met as a staff, reviewed Saturday's game film, and discussed our off-season schedule. Rick called that afternoon and said the Glazers wanted to make a change. He asked me to come to his house to meet with them. I knew then that my time with the Bucs had come to an end. Rick Stroud's article had been correct. Rich lived in one of the oldest sections of Tampa, in an old, pretty home guarded by a huge oak tree in the front yard. The driveway wound around that tree, which made backing out to the street almost impossible. As I pulled up and saw the Glazers' cars, I made it a point to note how close I was to that tree, so I could avoid hitting it when I left later. As it turned out, I was backing out of Rich's driveway about 1 minute later. The conversation was short and pleasant and lasted about 30 seconds. As Rich had said, the Glazers wanted to make a change. Joel, Brian, and Ed, the Glazers' 3 sons, who had been actively managing the team that year, were all present as they informed me that I was no longer the head coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I thanked them for the opportunity they had given me as head coach. My only question was about what would happen to my assistant coaches. The Glazers said they didn't know. After all, it would be up to the new head coach. Since they'd spent the last couple of days deciding whether or not to fire me, they said they had no idea yet who the new coach might be or what he would do with the staff. Tuesday evening, after my nightmare excursion to One Buck to pack up, Lauren and I went back one more time to make sure I'd gotten everything. Once inside, I suggested to Lauren that she go back outside and move the Explorer closer to the back door while I finished. The security officer who had let us in had given us some space, but I knew he was lingering somewhere nearby. Lauren hesitated. She told me she was worried she wouldn't be able to get back in. I tried to reassure her. I think you're overly concerned. Really? Your keypad code doesn't work. The guard used his code and walked us in, and now he's around the corner somewhere keeping tabs. Tony, we're not welcome here anymore. She did decide to go move the Explorer closer to the back door, but I knew she was right. Everything had changed. So all his fears come true, and he is fired as the head coach for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. At the end of my tenure with the Bucs, I really had no one to be upset with. The Glazers owned the team, and they had to do what they thought was best for the Buccaneers. Yes, if it were up to me, I would have preferred that Joel and I not have had that conversation in Atlanta, so I wouldn't have relied on it throughout the season. I would rather have been told that 2001 would be a make or break year, that we needed to advance deep into the playoffs and maybe win the Super Bowl if I wanted to keep my job. At the same time, however, I'd never lost sight of the fact that the Glazers saw me as an NFL head coach when no one else did. They gave me my first opportunity, and I'll always be grateful to them for that. So no, there was no one to be upset with. God just wanted me to move on to a different situation. His time for me in Tampa had been completed. So even though Tony's fired, he does still have a positive attitude towards the Glazer family because he is right. They did give him an opportunity when no one else did. And so he has them to thank for his first head coaching job in the NFL. So he leaves us with this chapter of, he and his family aren't sure what's next, but as Tony always says, right, God is in control. You got to have faith.